It's time, Fort Wayne. Your sports, your station. It's the Sports Rush with Brett Rump. Covering all the topics that hit a nerve here in the Summit City.
Clark goes 11 yards, touchdown.
Only on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Now here's your host, Brett Rump.
The greatest, most interesting, most important person of all time.
You are incredible.
Older than white.
Yeah, well, you're half right.
What is this, amateur hour?
This is going to be huge.
I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just when I think you've said the stupidest thing ever, you keep talking.
I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That boy ain't right.
The simplest way to put it, I have problems.
Welcome to the alleged show.
Taking you over the hump. It is a Wednesday edition of the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, 4 to 6. I am Brett Rump, along with Adam Lundy. Coming up this hour, we've got Scott Agness from the Fieldhouse Files, who will join us to talk about the Pacers' big loss to the New York Knicks last night. Adam still smiling. And, of course, we'll talk about the Indiana Fever and the latest with what's happening with the WNBA team down in our state capital. Scott Agness joins us coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll call it, from now. And, you know, I've been talking about this. IU, of course, with a head coaching search now on. Dusty May is a popular name, and I do kind of feel like Dusty May would be the guy that Indiana should and would hire if they can lock him down. But one thing with Dusty May is we're going to find out what level of interest he has, because if Michigan comes to him and throws a contract extension on his desk, what does Dusty May do? Does he try to delay the process of actually signing it? Because I guarantee you that if a contract extension arrives in Dusty May's office, it's going to be for a lot more money to stay at Michigan. And it's also going to have a lot bigger buyout, because now they realize the demand that there is on their head coach, and they're not going to want to let him go anywhere. And so that small buyout that's $3.5, $4 million, $5 million, whatever it is, that might end up being twice or three times that amount of money if they get Dusty May to sign a new contract. So if Dusty May is truly interested in becoming the next coach of the Indiana Hoosiers, he's going to probably try to delay the process of signing an extension. But what if he does? What if he does sign that extension? Then what does Indiana do? Well, I think there's a name that's starting to surface and bubble up out there that might be someone on the Indiana radar that Indiana is somewhat intrigued by, and I don't blame them. It's Texas Tech's coach, Grant McCasland. Now, that's a name you probably have not heard, and it's probably not a name you came up with on your own, because nobody knows who the heck is Grant McCasland. Well, Texas Tech has had a very good year. They're 18-5. They're 9-3 in the Big 12. They've got a 1-point overtime loss to Iowa State. I believe they also lost to Arizona, but they beat Arizona by 16 points back in January.
Yep.
And so they've had a solid year and are playing really well. And Grant McCasland is their 48-year-old head coach, and all he has done in his previous stops is win, win, win. A couple of stops ago, he was at Arkansas State, where he was 20-12 in one season before making the move to North Texas. And at North Texas, he went 135-65, 55-15 in conference play over his last 4 years. Now, he is from the Dallas area. He has coached primarily in the Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas area. He's at Texas Tech, so you wonder if prying him away from his homeland is going to be somewhat difficult. He went to school at Baylor, but hey, if they could get him into the heartland, into the Midwest, he might be a guy you want to talk to. Texas Tech's Grant McCasland.
Yeah, Purdue fans will recognize him. You mentioned the North Texas Mean Green. They were the team that upsetted then number 4 seeded Purdue in that year's NCAA tournament. I believe it was 2021 when that happened. So, yeah, definitely a quality basketball coach and gets the most out of his teams. No question about it.
And so keep that name in mind, Hoosier fans. Grant McCasland currently at Texas Tech. All right, so last night, Hoosiers pulled the surprise. They get the win over Michigan State at Michigan State, and it also delays the celebration for Michigan State coach Tom Izzo as he was poised to become the all-time wins leader in Big Ten victories, surpassing Bob Knight, who he currently is tied with. That tie still exists because the Hoosiers won the game last night, 71-67. And so for the Hoosiers, they improved their resume, but they're still nowhere close to being an NCAA tournament team. They've still got plenty of work to do, but they do have opportunities. They just have to go on a real run. That was only their second Quad A win, according to KenPom. They're 2-10 against Quad A competition on the KenPom scale. And in the NCAA net rankings, which is considered to be kind of the first source for determining who makes the field, Indiana is now 3-10 in what is called Quad 1 wins. So certainly nowhere close to a resume that earns them a spot in the field. But if you get hot late and, I guess you have a storyline because you've got a coach that has stepped away. Maybe that just tugs at the emotions a little bit of the committee if Indiana can go on a run. I don't see it happening. I just think that last night was an anomaly. Indiana had everything come together for them, things that haven't come together so far this year, and they happened last night. They had good interior play. Both Malik Renew and Omar Ballo had good nights. They both ended up with double-doubles. Indiana didn't take a lot of needless or wasted three-point shots, and as a result, they get a road win.
Yeah, one thing that I think is kind of interesting to do, just kind of gauge what is the quality of team that you need to be to get into this 64-team tournament, is kind of look at the current last four in and just kind of see what kind of quality teams you're looking at in that last four in. Right now, the last four in, you're looking at the Georgia Bulldogs at 16-9, 11th in the SEC, so that's a little bit surprising. The other ones, San Diego State Aztecs at 16-6, third in the Mountain West. Wake Forest, 18-6, fourth in the ACC, and the BYU Cougars, 16-8, sixth in the Big 12.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the numbers, and I was surprised. The ACC with maybe 4 or 5 deserving teams getting into the field.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that conference used to be the basketball conference, and not so much this year. They may not get 5 teams out of the ACC. And the SEC, a football conference, may go 11 deep. And right now, I think they're the best basketball conference, perhaps by perception, whether that's reality. But I think people look at that conference and think from top to bottom with Kentucky and Tennessee and, Alabama and Auburn, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking right now, and this bracketology has Tennessee, Auburn, and Alabama as 1 seeds. So
3 of the SEC schools.
Yeah.
Getting 1 seeds. Yeah, that tells you that bracketologist believes that the SEC is significantly stronger than any other conference.
Yep.
260-447-8500, the Parkview Sports Medicine text line. 260-447-8500. Disappointment for the Boilermakers last night. They have surrendered first place in the Big Ten to the Michigan Wolverines. Of course, Michigan got the 3-point win over the weekend against Indiana and a 2-point win over the Purdue Boilermakers last night when Braden Smith's desperation 3 was shortened to the right. And so Michigan holds on, gets the win in Ann Arbor. And, for the Boilermakers, they'll bounce back. I don't think it's that big of a deal. You lose a road game against a good opponent. The only surprise, perhaps, for Boilermakers fans is this Purdue team dominated head-to-head against Michigan when they played at Mackey Arena. But that just tells you how difficult it is to play on the road in conference games.
Absolutely. The text line is 260-447-8500. Somebody texted in. They say, I thought Brett was going to say T.J. Otzelberger of Iowa State.
Well, that's another name that I think is on the list. But I think what I've heard is Otzelberger may have like a insane buyout.
Oh, okay.
I think he signed or re-signed a new contract within the last year or so, and I think his buyout's like $18 million or something. So
looks like it ranges in a $30 to $40 million range.
Okay, even double that. All right, so yeah, I think Indiana's not going to pay that kind of price to get Otzelberger, even though he's a guy at Iowa State, Ames, Iowa. I just feel like you might be able to sucker him into Bloomington, but not if it's going to cost you $30 to $40 million to hire him.
That's insane.
And that's why, you look at a Dusty May, very manageable buyout. You look at Grant McCaslin at Texas Tech, very manageable buyout. I'm not sure the situation with Chris Beard, to be quite honest with you. I'm not sure what his buyout number is. But, those are one of the things you've got to look at. It's very easy to sit here and think, well, this guy's coaching this team, and Indiana would be a better job, and Indiana could probably pay more, so that guy should be a top candidate. But it isn't always just those statistics on the surface. You got to dig a little deeper and look at, okay, what is their length of contract they're currently on? What kind of bonus structure do they have? What is the buyout? And all of those things are important when you determine who's going to be on the list for the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, it looks like the buyout decreases for Chris Beard as the years go down. It starts at about $4.5 million. After the final 3 years, it goes to about $1 million. So
if it's $4.5 million right now, that's manageable.
Yes.
I think you're probably going to look at guys. You will look at anybody that's probably got a $6 million or less buyout.
You'd have to think so, yeah.
If you're going to move on at a major university, it's probably going to cost you $5 or $6 million, and that's something that can be absorbed by some of the big donors that maybe were behind the idea of moving on from Mike Woodson.
Our guy Ryan Eaton weighing in on Twitter, he's asking about Nate Oates.
Got a pretty good deal going right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd be able to even pull him away from Alabama.
That's the thing is I don't know if you get a much better job, and Alabama's that's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, and especially with, like you said, the current perception of SEC basketball, that's
like Indiana fans are like, let's just go get Dan Hurley.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some Indiana fans that probably don't want a Dan Hurley to represent them as their head coach.
He was out there last night.
Of course, they had Bobby Knight.
The crowd.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
Yeah, but anyway, it's an interesting decision that's ahead for Scott Dolson. But keep that name in mind: Texas Tech's Grant McCaslin.
All right, we'll put that down on the record here. You could call it first.
Big pink out coming up on Saturday.
Oh, yeah, huge game for the Lady Mastodons, the women's Mastodons basketball team.
They're taking on Cleveland State.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it's clearly a 3-team Horizon League race. Cleveland State right now, the third-place team, and they're the only one of the top three that really have a bad loss because they're the only one that has lost to someone outside of the top three. But they've also got losses already head-to-head against Green Bay and Purdue-Fort Wayne. So it's a huge game for Cleveland State. They're going to be in action tonight at Northern Kentucky. You wonder if it could be a trap game at Northern Kentucky for Cleveland State tonight.
Ooh, that'll be interesting.
They'll probably stay on the road and just travel straight up to Fort Wayne, spend the extra day here in Fort Wayne, and prepare for the Saturday afternoon contest. But 2 o'clock, you want to see two really outstanding basketball programs, great players. There's a trio that is really good for Cleveland State. With Destiny Leo, one of the best shooters in the conference. You've got Lauren Ross for the Mastodons, also one of the best shooters, not only in the conference but in the nation. And then Cleveland State also has Michaela Purdue and Jordana Riesma, a couple of other standouts, all-conference type players. And so it will be a huge game coming up Saturday. It's pink out, so there's a greater cause also. But hope to see you at the Gates Center coming up this Saturday. Mastodons basketball, men's basketball tonight, 6:15 on the air. 6:30 will be tip time. John Nolan has all the action from Youngstown, Ohio, as the Mastodons take on Youngstown State. Got to take a break, and when we come back, Scott Agness joins us on the other side. It's the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Back on the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix 4 to 6. Brett Rump with Adam Lundy. And, of course, do be careful out on the streets. A little freezing rain, snow falling. You've got just treacherous conditions here in northeast Indiana. And believe me, some of the side streets, mess, total mess. But we want you to get home safely this afternoon and kind of keep you company if it takes a little extra time. Hopefully we can entertain you for that extra time on the road this afternoon. Right now, I want to talk Pacers basketball. Nobody does it better than Scott Agness with the Fieldhouse Files. And last night, the Pacers lose a game rather convincingly to the New York Knicks. Pacers made some runs. You expect that at home. But I just always felt like they were playing from behind, almost like they were running on a treadmill.
Yeah, it was a situation where they did a nice job keeping Jalen Brunson contained, but the reality going in is you knew it was going to be quite a challenge, Brett, containing Karl Anthony Towns. It is anyway, but Miles Turner remains out after taking that friendly fire shot from Benedict Mathurin on a rebound a couple games ago. He's not going to play tonight, didn't even make the trip, and so Towns became that all-NBA player that he is and feasted inside. And then the other thing that kind of, quite frankly, really disappointed was that hard play, that effort, that level of concern that Rick Carlisle will often talk about. That reared its head once again, and that was a disappointment. Again, it wasn't that they lost, it was how they lost.
You know, Scott, here's what I kind of diagnosed out of this, too, is it wasn't just effort, but it was lack of awareness and lack of paying attention to the details. And I just felt like New York was much better at taking care of the details of the game, where the Pacers just seemed to kind of, I don't know, ignore them in some ways.
How many times are they going to just stand, get a defensive stop, stand around and watch the ball go up, not get a rebound? And there was a sequence, I think, in the end of the third quarter where Josh Hart had a couple in a row, 3-minute stretch where they had 5 offensive rebounds, 12 for the game. And they easily dominated the boards there. Those are the things that if you're Rick Carlisle, you don't tolerate, that are unacceptable. It's one thing to, the opponent knocks down shots or is just more talented than you. It's another thing when you are physically getting outworked, outplayed, and it's on your home floor.
Was there any excuse given for that type of performance? Clearly, they just completed a swing out on the West Coast. Does that have any impact on last night?
It does slightly, but I think you're making an excuse there. This is an experienced group that has played together, that knows each other's tendencies. The other way you could go about it is the other way. It's in 2 days after tonight. They're on their break. It's spring break for them coming up with All-Star break, and so oftentimes here in the week leading up to it, it's really difficult to get a team and players' focus because they might be thinking about that beach or whatever, rather than what they need to do to get the job done tonight. And so that, again, will be a challenge here tonight against the worst team in the league in the Wizards.
Yeah, that's the sad thing about it, is you've got the getaway game, which sometimes you never know what to expect out of a team when it's the getaway game, and you've got a team you should beat after a team that kind of thoroughly handled you the night before. You'd think the Pacers would go into this desperate because nobody wants to take a 3-game losing streak into their, quote, vacation, holiday, spring break, whatever you want to call it, Scott. Nobody wants to take a 3-game losing streak with them on this trip.
Brett, it's even worse than that. Again, this is the worst team in the league. This is the team that is outright trying to tank, but they have lost 3 in a row, but they won 3 in a row before that. So they have shown signs of being able to win here as of late. Miles is going to be out. I expect the change in the starting lineup to continue here tonight. But this is one, if you do lose tonight, this one is inexplicable. It's unexplainable, and it's painful. Whereas the Knicks, you were probably going to lose anyway. It's just how they went about it, and their level of compete was just flat-out disappointing.
Scott Agness, Fieldhouse Files, joining us here on the Sports Rush. Quickly, Scott, want to talk about the state of the Fever because things are looking up. Now, they did free up some money with Katie Lou Samuelson being waived. What is still ahead? What can we expect right now from the Fever? Is there something in the works? Do you know what kind of money they've got to spend and what kind of quality they can get back for that money?
Yeah, they have right now enough money to go sign at least one player. It really would be difficult to sign 2 without another move on the way. There was another player that came in that Sophie Cunningham trade. We haven't got their thoughts on what they think about her, if she has a future here. Christy Wallace seemingly was out of the rotation last year after the Olympic break, rather. I wonder if she still has a future here, to be sure. But the majority of the moves and the bulk of what they have done is already competed, and I thought it was completed. And I thought it was cool last night where you had 4 Fever players there sitting courtside with Caitlin Clark, Lexi Hall, along with DeWanna Bonner, who just was introduced to Fever fans, and then Aaliyah Boston. So that was a special night, too, at the Pacers last night.
Yeah, I saw that shot. There was a video. There was a photo. It was pretty cool having the Fever there to support the Pacers, but hopefully things go a little bit better for the Fever when we roll around to their season. All right, Scott, always appreciate you. What are you going to be doing yourself? You've got a break, too. You're going on spring break, catching some rays down in the Sunshine State. What are you up to?
Yeah, I wish. Absolutely. But no, for me, it's going to be playing catch-up. I still have a couple stories taking people behind the scenes from the Pacers Paris trip, catching up on some Fever stories as well of what's gone on there. Because you're right, there's a lot of excitement surrounding that team, but what Amber Cox and Kelly Kroskoff have done in the front office, I think, in the big picture, is something worth taking a look at. And then I even went to a Butler practice a couple months ago and talked with Connor McCaffrey, Caitlin Clark's boyfriend, but also an assistant coach with Butler. So that's a story I plan to get out here in the next couple of weeks as well as they wrap up and enter the postseason for college basketball.
What I'm kind of interested in, and I don't know if you've gotten any kind of gauge on this, but I'm curious with the Fever, what has happened more often? The Fever reaching out for a player they're interested in, or players that have reached out to the Fever? And I'm not talking about who's been signed. I'm just talking about the overall number of players that the Pacers or the Fever have gone out and asked about, or on the other side, players that have contacted the Fever and say, hey, would you be interested? I'd like to play there.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is all their signings so far have been relationship driven, where the GM had been with DeWanna Bonner for 4 years in Phoenix, where the coaching staff was with DeWanna Bonner the last couple of years. And so much is hinged on that. And so I think you restart those conversations and maybe the player leans on the front office and then they're like, hey, we might have a spot for you, and things work out that way. I would guess this offseason, Brett, it's more Fever reaching out, but I think that will change significantly more in the coming years as more people get a handle of how the front office that's newly installed operates, and more players wanting to get involved with this current movement here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and I think with Caitlin Clark being part of the organization, that the players are going to be treated extremely well throughout the year, whether that means, playing in bigger arenas, nicer locker rooms, whatever it might be. The players will be very well taken care of. Scott,
the reality, though, is that's not for everybody. Not everyone wants to play in front of the 17,000 or shines, right? It's kind of like if you're on the golf course. Some players, if you start making a bet, they cringe and get uncomfortable. But if you can play freely without a crowd, they are more themselves. So that's the other thing the front office has to parcel through and make sure they sign the right players that are comfortable in a high-stakes environment every single game.
That's an interesting point, because that might be just something when you look at the women's basketball game. Obviously, there are some that are going to come up and play in programs that just are not heavily attended and aren't used to playing in front of those kind of crowds. Scott, appreciate it as always. Have a great break, and we will look forward to talking to you in the next, they call it next third of the season.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brett.
Scott Agness from the Fieldhouse Files. If you follow the Pacers or Fever, or both, you can always keep up with the latest by subscribing to the Fieldhouse Files at thefieldhousefiles.com. All right, we got to take a break. Plenty more coming up. We're here till 6. It's the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Echo the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, 4 to 6. All right, Adam, I made you wait long enough after all the, talk about the weather and IU and Purdue, Mastodons. We've covered enough today, and I've made you wait this out.
Oh, is it time?
It's time.
Oh, we're going to talk about what happened.
I'm going to let you weigh in. Of course, we just talked to Scott Agness about it a little bit, but I'm going to let you weigh in on what we saw last night, because I know you are just basking in the glory of a Knicks win.
Yeah, no. I'll tell you what I thought about last night. I feel like I undervalued the presence of Miles Turner for the Pacers a little bit, because Karl Anthony Towns did absolutely nothing but dominate whatever excuse of the center the Pacers wanted to throw out there last night, because it was not good enough. I know Turner isn't necessarily a rim protector.
I've undervalued him for about 7 years now, but I don't know if it makes a huge difference. Again, it's, I'm not sure that Turner is the difference maker if Karl Anthony Towns wants to go off like that.
My goodness, you said it. He absolutely destroyed the Pacers last night, whether it was just in the paint, little floaters. And the thing is, he can pass, too. He had some absolutely amazing assists to Josh Hart, who also had a fantastic night last night.
Well, and that's the thing, is Karl Anthony Towns you can live with if he has a big night, because he's, a bona fide star. He's, if he scores 30, maybe some nights he'll get 40. But you have to hope that he's taking the 40, those extra points, he's taking them from someone else. But then he's dishing it, and Josh Hart is lighting you up. And what was with Pascal Siakam? Just, daydreaming. And Obi Toppin, daydreaming. They let Hart just go wherever he wanted to go. And
it was cut after cut. Death by 1,000 cuts, if you want to call it that. But
not only the cuts, the backdoor cuts and the cuts to the basket, good sharp cuts, which you don't see in the NBA a whole ton. Cuts away from the basketball. How about that?
Crazy.
But when he exploded to the basket for offensive rebounds, and the Pacers didn't even acknowledge the thought of a box out. It was just, that's just so frustrating, is when it's just basketball 101, things you're taught in middle school, and you've got NBA teams that aren't willing to put forth the effort because it's not part of the everyday NBA game. And I think in some ways, that's an example of why some people have kind of given up on the NBA, not thrilled with the NBA. Now you've got people that question college basketball because now is it driven by money or is it driven by kids that have grown up wanting to represent a certain university? But clearly in the NBA, there's not the attention to detail. And that's kind of what we talked to Scott Agness about was, last night the Pacers paid zero attention to the details of the game.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's also kind of stunning that, Jalen Brunson was in all that foul trouble. He only played 23 minutes and had 8 points, and yet the Pacers were still, an easy loss by 13.
I turned it on for almost an entire quarter and never saw Brunson on the floor.
Yeah.
And they didn't need him.
No, they didn't, because the likes of Cameron Payne, Miles McBride, and Landry Shamet.
McBride, how about the game he had? I thought he was terrific.
Did not miss from three.
Look at his plus minus. I think he was a plus 25 in the game.
He sure is, yeah. Plus 25 for last night.
And how many minutes?
25.
25 minutes plus 25,
yeah.
Right? So it's a 48-minute game. So that would be on pace to be plus 48. And it was just about that bad.
Yeah.
Really, the game ended up not being quite as close as the final score may indicate.
Right. Honestly, that's 13 is graceful. That's window dressing at that point. But no.
Yeah, because the Knicks were putting it away. And here's the sad part, and this is typical NBA. Pacers were in this game late third quarter.
They were.
It was the last minute of the third quarter where the snowball started rolling downhill.
Yeah, and I think there was even a moment in the fourth where they could have pulled within 6, but I believe T.J. McConnell missed 2 free throws and it remained 8, and then the Knicks kind of pulled away again. But that's
what happened in the last minute of the third quarter.
Yeah,
was 2 missed free throws, and Knicks come right down and score. And so you have a 4-point swing just like that, and it goes from being a 2-point game to a 6-point game to an 8-point game. And really it was like you just saw the game slipping out of the Pacers' grasp at that point. The Knicks had gotten control back. Because there for a while, a good 4-minute stretch, 5-minute stretch, the Pacers were making a nice run at late third quarter. But then they completely blew it in the last minute of the third quarter and then never really got control. You could say, they were closing the gap. That's fine. NBA, you still have some runs, but you never felt like the Pacers were back in the game. The crowd didn't feel it. The Pacers never really got a legitimate chance to win that game. And next thing you know, the Knicks are up. Was it 20? What was the biggest margin?
Ooh, largest margin. I'm not sure.
Close to 20.
But yeah.
If it wasn't 20. I'm trying to remember if they ever actually eclipsed the 20-point lead, which I thought they did. But yeah, they put it away there in the fourth. And, again, you don't have Miles Turner, but you can't use that as an excuse. You had Thomas Bryant, but Bryant was doing okay on the offensive end.
Sure.
But he would just get knocked out of the way by Karl Anthony Towns or just not, a step quick enough. We actually got to see Jahlil Okafor get in the game for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
A little bit of garbage time, but good story there. I mean, it had been, over 1,000 days since his last NBA action. Had played in places like China, other places overseas, so quite the journey back to the NBA for a first overall pick.
So the Pacers fall 128-115 was the final as the New York Knicks get the win. Knicks improved to 35-18 on the season and an impressive 17-8 on road games, while the Pacers dropped to 29-23 with their second consecutive loss.
Yeah, and they have one more game tonight before the All-Star break. They're on the road in D.C. taking on the Wizards.
You gotta hope. Please, don't make it 3 in a row to go into the break.
They're 10.5-point favorites at Washington.
Yeah, I know. It's a game they ought to win comfortably.
Ought to.
But again, back-to-back, travel, everything else involved. You never know what to expect. But, Pacers in action tonight, and we've got Mastodons basketball. So
we do.
No Pacers basketball tonight because the Mastodons will be taking on Youngstown State. Oh, man, it's a big week, and I'm not there.
You're not. You got to watch from home, my man.
You know how excruciating that is to watch from home.
I bet.
You get extremely frustrated. Then you actually type out about 10 tweets that you realize you really can't send.
Better delete
because you get so frustrated because you're so into it. You have no control, and it's when you're doing the game, you are really focused on things where it takes your mind off what the score is, what the situation, so there's a certain different dynamic when you're calling the game versus when you are watching.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to be tough tonight to sit there and watch the game. It's not about listening to Nolan and think, oh, I wish I was there.
No.
That isn't it. It's just the dynamic of not being at the game, not having a feel for the team, the energy or whatever before the game, because it's huge tonight with Youngstown State. I mean, you look at the standings, and Youngstown State could leapfrog the Mastodons in the standings with a win tonight. Robert Morris also in that position where they could end up in second. So the Dons could go anywhere from second to fourth, depending on the result of tonight's game.
A lot on the line against the Penguins tonight, man.
But that game will start actually earlier. Normally we have Mastodons games at 7 o'clock, but this one starts at 6:30. So the pregame show at 6:15. Again, with John Nolan on the call from Youngstown, Ohio.
Should be fun. Looking forward to that tonight.
Give you a little side note. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how this happens or how officials are scheduled, but of course with the NCAA, you've got officials, and there's a misunderstanding by some that there are Horizon League officials, there are Big Ten officials, and that's not the case. Now, that is the case in football, where you have officials that are actually hired by and assigned by the conference. But in basketball, it's not the same. And so all of the officials can cross over and do multiple leagues, and you have seen that quite a bit over the last couple of years. But here's an interesting one. Earlier, a couple of weeks ago, the Mastodons were in Milwaukee for that Sunday afternoon game, and one of the officials, Earl Walton, who's like the number 22 ranked official right now in the country, he did Michigan State at USC the afternoon before doing the game in Milwaukee. But it was afternoon in California at USC, and so he was working until like 7 o'clock and had to somehow be in Milwaukee for, a 2 o'clock tip-off the next day?
Wow.
And now we did find out. Coach Kaufman actually had a chance to talk to the official and ask him about his schedule and ask, how did you go from Los Angeles to Milwaukee in 14, 16 hours or whatever it was? And he said that originally he was supposed to be in Minnesota at the Golden Gophers game, which would have made it an easy trip over to Milwaukee to do the game the next day. But then they made a last-second switch on the Big Ten schedule. He ended up out at USC, and and they didn't change the Sunday game. So he still had to figure out a way to get from Los Angeles to Milwaukee to do that game. Well, tonight's going to be a similar situation because the Mastodons have one of the three officials who last night was working in Logan, Utah for Utah State. And Logan is like an hour and 15 minutes north of Salt Lake City, which means the required travel is to get a rental car and get to Salt Lake City Airport, then get a flight from Salt Lake City that arrives in Chicago O'Hare, then get a connecting flight from Chicago O'Hare to Cleveland, and then get a rental car that can get you from Cleveland to Youngstown. The total travel would put him, based on the only flight that was available to do this, that would fit in the window of time that this official had. I looked up, and the only way he could do it is if he lands at like 2:45 on the arrival from O'Hare. Then he would get a rental car, probably be on the road somewhere between 3:30, 3:45, and get to Youngstown about 5 o'clock for the 6:30 game. I mean, where's the rest? You're losing 2 hours with the time difference. And last night's game, by the way, started at 11 o'clock Eastern time in Logan, Utah. Those kind of things shouldn't happen because you shouldn't have an official who's facing fatigue trying to work a college basketball game when you've got so many other officials geographically in a much better spot. I do not get it. And I will say this, the official that's coming, normally a pretty good official. But, again, you test their skills when you add sleep deprivation into the mix.
Yeah, that's a crazy schedule. I can't imagine trying to referee a game after all that.
So that game coming up tonight, and, we are looking forward to the coverage.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be doing one of those things that a lot of people always tell me they try to do at home, and that is watch the game, listen to John. That's the way you're supposed to watch.
Yeah.
Because on ESPN Plus, those are announcers that are provided by the university who is hosting the game. So you generally don't get the most impartial
I see.
broadcast. So
listen to John.
So if you want partiality, you might as well get partiality the Don's way and listen to John.
Exactly.
And that's no criticism of John. That's just the way it is. Then you can listen to the Mastodons broadcast that is paid for by Purdue Fort Wayne. All right, so we'll take a time out. We're going to come back. What do we have to do? Just kind of wrap it up here on the other side?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll wrap things up.
And then we'll slide our way home. And, of course, everybody be safe on the roads.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely a little bit treacherous out there, so do be careful. It's the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Welcome back, final time to the Sports Rush, your daily local sports fix, 4 to 6. Of course, do be careful taking your time getting home because the roads are a bit treacherous and, the combination of ice, freezing rain, snow, not a good combination. It's going to be a rough night throughout the night tonight. Might be one of those nights just to sit at home and, like we said, tune in on maybe the stream or the app, listen to some Mastodons basketball. And if you watch it, then what you do is you do a little bit of both. You watch it and you listen. John Nolan on the call for Mastodons basketball coming up tonight. Now, tomorrow, we've got a big company function. And for those not familiar with our parent company, it's Federated Media, which is based in the South Bend, Mishawaka area and Fort Wayne. And so we've got employees in both locations. And so we have our annual celebration, awards, whatever you might want to call it, but it's going to be in an undisclosed location on the road tomorrow so that it's convenient to both of our offices. And so we will be out tomorrow. No Sports Rush tomorrow. And we will be back on Friday heading into high school basketball. Once again, congratulations to Wayne, the huge win last night over Homestead. Wayne can wrap up the SAC with a win at Southside coming up on Friday. Meanwhile, we will be at Leo because this game could go a long way in deciding what happens ultimately as the top of the NE8 is up for grabs as Leo will be hosting Columbia City. That is our Parkview Sports Medicine High School basketball game of the week. It will start at about 7:30, and then after the game, you can join us at the East DuPont Pizza Hut for our Parkview Sports Medicine post-game show. Scores for your Friday night, highlights, analysis, and, of course, getting you set up for previews of the girls' basketball regionals, which come up this Saturday. All right, so big thanks to our guests that appeared on the show. It's kind of a short list, but they were fantastic. Scott Agness from the Fieldhouse Files and Eric Dutkevich. That wraps it up for our Hump Day edition. Once again, be safe out there. We'll be back on Friday, 4 to 6, with another edition of the Sports Rush on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM.